A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the National Wages Council and tafep webinar on driving sustainable business results with flexible wage system. My name is Lavanya and I'm your MC for today. A warm welcome to all our guests, representatives from the trade associations, chambers, and all employers who are here with us today. Thank you for taking your time to join us this afternoon as we learn how companies can drive sustainable business results with flexible wage system. Today's webinar is brought to you by tafep and the tripartite partners, namely Ministry of Manpower, Singapore National Employers Federation, and the National Trades Union Congress. Before we begin the program proper, I would like to take us through some house rules. Do note that this webinar session will be recorded and shared with you later. So we encourage participants to participate actively in the discussion. Towards the end of the session, we will be requesting for your feedback and the preferred email address that you wish for us to send the slides. And if you have any questions for the presenters and panelists later, do utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Type in your questions and the speakers will try to address them as much as they can. If there are some questions that we were not able to address in time, we will follow up with you after the webinar. And to minimize disruption, participants' video and microphone will be disabled. Lastly, if you or your colleagues encounter any technical difficulties during this webinar, please drop us an email at at events@tafep.sg. Events@tafep.sg. Our colleagues are on standby to assist you upon receiving your email. Thank you for your understanding, and we look forward to your participation. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Faith Lee, General Manager of tafep, to kickstart today's webinar with her opening remarks. Ms. Faith, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Ms. Chan Hui Fong, Deputy Secretary General, NTUC, Mr. Sim Gim Guan, Executive Director, Singapore National Employers Federation, Mr. Hao Shuo, Director of Ministry of Manpower, distinguished speakers and panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome you to today's webinar, jointly organized by the National Wages Council and tafep. One thing that the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted to companies, workers, tripartite partners alike is the value of tripartite collaborations and the importance of being agile and resilience in the face of uncertainty. For some employers in Singapore, 2020 and the first half of 2021 may have been the first time that they had to plan and work with their unions and workers to implement deep cost-saving measures. The tripartite partners and the NWC were also hard at work last year to develop and implement relevant recommendations to help businesses and workers through this difficult period. Last year, the tripartite partners updated the tripartite advisory on managing excess manpower and responsible retrenchment, or TAMEM for short, to provide clear guidance on how employers should conduct retrenchments responsibly. The NWC also issued guidelines and subsequently a supplementary guideline on how employers can respond to COVID-19, sustain their businesses, and save jobs. One measure that both the TAMEM as well as the NWC's 2020 supplementary guidelines highlighted is the flexible wage system. Implemented well, it can be an effective tool for companies to make quick but contained wage adjustments in a volatile business environment. At the same time, this will help them remain cost competitive and provide greater job security and certainty to their employees. During good times, the flexible wage system also provides employees a measure of certainty for rewards based on good performance. In other words, it's a resilient wage structure that can benefit all parties. So today we are really honored to have an esteemed slate of well-qualified and experienced speakers and panelists to share their views and experiences on why and how a competitive, resilient, and flexible wage system can benefit your organization. I'm sure everyone will gain from their sharing and the follow-up discussions. So I wish you a fruitful webinar and a good afternoon ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith, for the opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall now proceed to our first presentation on responsible cost-saving measures in response to business downturn. Our speaker is Mr. Shuo, Director of Operations, Policy and Planning at the Labour Relations and Workplaces Division in the Ministry of Manpower. He oversees the planning, coordination, and implementation of operations while supporting the review of key employment legislations to enforce employment standards and resolve workplace disputes. Shuo, please.
Hi everyone. Very happy to be here. Just give me a minute while I load the slides. I hope everyone should be able to see it right now.
Yes.
Yeah. So very good afternoon to everyone again. Today I'll be talking a bit more about the flexible wage system as well as managing excess manpower. The two, as Faith mentioned, have some sort of linkage, mainly because of both NWC as well as the Trial Advisory on Managing Excess Manpower. Both mention about cost-saving measures, and FWS is one way of getting employers to be able to adjust wages in response to changes in the broader economic environment or the business downturn. So without further ado, I'll jump right into it. I think Faith gave a bit of background. So over the past 2 years, actually, the Trial partners have been hard at work, issuing timely guidance to employers on changes on wages, what are the norms, cost-saving measures, as well as how to conduct retrenchments responsibly. So if we look at the slide, actually there are 3 sections. I think the first thing we did when COVID struck was really to help to guide employers about how to deal with this issue of workers who went overseas, either for holiday or work. When they come back, they have to be on SHN or LOA back then. How to deal with leave issues, and later on when there was circuit breaker, we had to advise employers to tap on the job support scheme to give fair wage support to their workers. And again, this year we had a vaccination advisory when the vaccines were rolled out to help employers build a very resilient workplace when it comes to fighting COVID outbreaks. TAMEM itself was reviewed twice last year. I think the first time we did it was in March 2020. The idea then was the previous version of TAMEM wasn't very clear on what are all the measures that the employers can consider before they conduct retrenchment. So when we reviewed it, we gave a better order of the measures that employers can take, from shorter work week to no pay leave to actually implementing monthly variable component cut, which actually is part of FWS. So subsequently in November later that year, we went ahead and really wanted to give better guidance in terms of how employers can conduct retrenchments responsibly. So I think that's the important point I'll cover later. But most of the slides here today are focused on a flexible wage system. And the NWC met twice last year. The supplementary guidelines is the latest. I think the NWC reaffirmed its relevance this year. So I'll go into that a bit more detail. Okay. Yeah, so when NWC issued the supplementary guidelines, there were 4 key recommendations. The first is that we recognize not all employers are affected by the pandemic to the same degree. Some employers are still doing very well. In fact, some expanded their workforce and they benefited from the expansion, benefited from the job growth initiative in terms of support for the new hires. Employers are also experiencing business recovery, I think, starting from late last year until this year. Many employers are actually doing much better. So those employers, if they have implemented cost-saving measures when the pandemic first struck us, then these employers should look into rolling back these cost-saving measures and helping the workers get back to their normal salaries. The urgent implementation of the flexible wage system is something that NWC wanted all employers to take note of. It is an important tool to build a very competitive and resilient wage structure so that you can manage your wage costs during a business downturn and also reward your employees appropriately when the business is good. And last point is about special consideration for low-wage workers. That is something I think NWC emphasized in the first report and subsequently in the second report also. It's just to give one level of better treatment to low-wage workers. For example, if you decided for wage freeze for everyone, then low-wage workers, maybe you should consider a modest wage increase. And similarly, if you have the wage cut for everyone, maybe you can consider a wage freeze for the lower wage workers. So as mentioned, our economic outlook now is very different from 2020. MTI revised the GDP growth from 6 to 7%, growth revised to 6 to 7%, up from 4 to 6%. I think that was published in August this year. And we have also seen news reports of companies rolling back some of the cost-saving measures that have been in place for over a year. SIA is an example here. I think on 13th of August, if I don't remember wrongly, they announced that they will be lifting all the MVC cuts, and the only cuts that will stay are really for senior management, for the board members who are taking a solidarity wage cut, solidarity wage cut together with the management of the company. And we are seeing fewer and fewer notifications from employers on cost-saving measures. Very few of them have actually renewed the cost-saving measures. So I think we're confident that most of the wages are actually restored by now. The flexible wage system plays into this whole issue about wage restoration, wage cuts, and it's actually a good opportune time for us to discuss the FWS and see how employers can tap on FWS to build more resilience into their company. So actually, it's not new. It was first introduced in 1986 when the business environment was very volatile. But back then, we only have two components. There was the fixed wage component, which is about 80%, and there was an annual variable component of 20%. Then right now, I think if you look at the next slide later, I'll show it, we actually adjusted to a 70, 10, and 20 breakdown. So what the FWS does is as a sizable variable component that allows employers to reward employees with bigger bonuses in good times and manage your wage costs in the bad times. So overall, I think from the whole global perspective, if our companies are able to adjust wages more dynamically in response to changing business environment, we are actually in a better position compared to jurisdictions where perhaps the wage structure is a bit more rigid, where companies cannot adjust the wages so readily in response to changing business environment, and therefore our businesses are likely to have just a bit more competitive edge compared to companies elsewhere. In terms of adoption, it hasn't been that great. I think when the NWC released its report, we're looking at 29% of the employees having both MVC and AVC. Last year, we did the survey again. I think it's about 31%. So you're looking at the yellow portion of the pie chart. And what we really hope is that the 57%, the blue portion, you'll continue to adopt MVC, because just having the AVC itself, which is usually in the form of annual bonus, is insufficient. I think we have seen in the COVID pandemic that business environment can change suddenly. And if your annual bonus is paid just at specific times of year, you will not be able to use that to adjust it and in response to the changing business condition. But overall, I think we're still heartened to know that there's a bit of change. But I hope that people who have attended the seminar, who have gone to tafep's websites, hopefully will see more employers adopting MVC in the year ahead. In terms of structure, we also mentioned that not all employees are treated the same. So we actually recommended different levels of wage structure in terms of the size of the variable component for the different employees. So for the rank and file, it's very clear. We have a 70% fixed, a 10% MVC, and a 20% AVC, which stands for annual variable. MVC is monthly variable. Then for middle management and the senior management, we are actually less specific in terms of the breakdown between the MVC and the AVC. So, but still we're looking at 60% fixed for the middle management, 40% variable, and for the senior management, 50% fixed and 50% variable. So you might ask, why is this fixed this way? I think later on I'll explain it why. So if you look at how MVC and AVC are supposed to be implemented as part of FWS, one thing is very important is to have the right KPI and indicators for your MVC and AVC adjustments. So some trigger points that are commonly used are sustained reduction in terms of your production output, cargo load yield, gross operating profit, and maybe revenue and sales. So these are common indicators that companies use. MVC adjustments usually can be triggered more quickly when some of these indicators dip below maybe the threshold for 2 consecutive months, then you might want to trigger MVC cut. Then the AVC, like I said, because it's paid most of the time in specific times of year, maybe it takes into some of the longer term performance indicators and outlook for the company. And also the AVC will take into greater account the individual performance of the employee. In terms of supporting systems and practices, these are just 2 things that we have listed, but I think there are more. But first and foremost is really have that proper communication to all your employees in terms of when MVC or AVC cuts can be triggered, when they will be restored, and to have that regular sharing of the company performance. So the employees are not kept in the dark and guessing when is the company actually going to trigger MVC cut or restore MVC that was cut. So we don't want that kind of uncertainty hang over the employee's head. And the second point is really the management should take the lead. And you saw why the management variable component is 50%, is because they can take deeper cuts so that the employees are really assured that everyone is in this journey together. That if we have to make sacrifices, both the management, the middle management, and the rank and file will work together to ensure sustainability of the business and survival of the firm in the long term. Just a couple of examples we have listed for the NWC guidelines. I think it was in the annex. I'm not sure how many people have read the guidelines in detail, but I'll just go through conceptually what did the NWC actually recommend. So first, if your company made, let's say you have a worker that earns $2,000 a month, who has an annual variable component or annual bonus of 2 months, and you did a 5% cut during the COVID-19 pandemic. What happens is upon restoration, you should recognize this 5% cut as a new NVC. So that will actually ensure that you have a 5% NVC after you have made a cut. Then when you eventually restore the salary, the $100 that restored, you should be recognizing that as a new NVC. And through your annual increments to the employees in the next couple of years, you can actually build this NVC component up to 10%. The point here is not to adjust your fixed salary such that your MVC percentage actually becomes smaller, but to increase the MVC quantum so that eventually you reach your 10% of the monthly component. In terms of the yearly variable component, what the slide here shows is 2 months. Actually, 2 months is not enough for 20%. It's about 14% of employees' wages. So we also want employers, when you build annual increment into the employees' wages, to look into increasing the annual variable component so that eventually you reach about 20%. The second example is a firm that was severely affected, and this firm had to make very deep cuts in order to avoid retrenchments. So from a $2,000 salary, actually, they made a 20% cut. What the NWC actually recommended is to recognize 10% of the salary cut here as MVC. Then the other 10% of the cut as an exceptional cut to the fixed monthly salary of the employee. Then when you restore, of course, the $200 that's part of the fixed cut should restore the full fixed monthly salary 2008, and $200 in terms of MVC should be recognized as, and when it's restored, should be recognized as MVC. Again, for this firm, maybe they cut the annual variable component to 0, and with the restore, they had a 2 months, but as I said, the 2 months is not enough. So you should again try to increase your AVC component beyond the 2 months, such as make about 20% of the yearly salary of the employee. I've described what FWS is, how it works, But I think also just to crystallize some of the benefits from implementing FWS. First, it's really to allow quick adjustments amidst economic or business uncertainties so that you are able to sustain the business operations. And the second point is if you have your company performance, you have your business output somehow linked to the employees' compensation, actually it provides a common goal for all employees and help to increase productivity of the firm. And another point is that if you had gone with retrenchment, you had gone with no pay leave during times of business lag, actually you have a more difficult task in terms of recovery because you have to hire again, you have to train your workers again. But if you use FWS to make temporary adjustments, then it's possible that you are able to ramp up more quickly when the economic condition changes. Then for employees, I think the FWS provides certain certainty in terms of job security. They are better able to manage their finances. And also, I think they will appreciate something that's really recognizing the rewards and contributions to a firm. And having that kind of performance-linked compensation ensures a better performance from the employees and certainty that when the business recovers, whatever cuts they have suffered will be restored. And for the overall workplace, I think what FWS does is really to prevent workplace disputes. I think having harmonious workplaces, especially in times of a business downturn, is important for every firm. We have seen about 1,200 complaints coming to MOM during the past year or so when employees complain about unfair adjustments to wages. By and large, I think after investigation, after communicating, talking to the employer and the employee, we found that most of these disputes could have been avoided. And employers, by and large, have been very responsible. They have done right by the employees. But sometimes what's missing is really that last bit of communication with the employee. Why did I make this cut? What was the consideration from the management? And how much cuts the management have made? So some of these communication messages are not trickled down to the ground well enough, resulting in some level of misunderstanding among the rank and file employees. Maybe they see the management they didn't realize that the management or supervisors are taking a deeper cut, and then they file a complaint with MOM saying that the company has treated them unfairly. So we actually go in and talk to both parties and understand what are the considerations for the wage adjustments. Where possible, I think we also ask firms to be more sympathetic in terms of the livelihoods of the employees. And when tafep went in, I think during circuit breaker, we actually managed to convince a substantial portion of the companies to improve their wage support to the employees. Just one case example. This was a hospitality firm. So when they introduced NVC in February 2020, I think business were already beginning to slow down. So by May circuit breaker, they're really unable to sustain the same level of wage costs for all the employees, and they have to trigger the NVC cut based on pre-agreed indicators. So in this example, actually, what the firm was able to do is to avoid prolonged discussions with the employees on what should be the NVC cut, how much cut they should be, what form of cost-saving measures they should adopt. So by actually engaging this process, building this FWS up early, you are able to respond more quickly in terms of crisis, while other firms may be embroiled in prolonged discussions and perhaps a deadlock on what should be the right triggers. If you don't have that right preparation work beforehand, I think when the crisis actually strikes, you find that you have to struggle a lot in terms of communication, in terms of consulting the employees, when emotions are high, when people feel very uncertain about the future. A couple of common questions about FWS. I think we get that a lot. So one is that my company was able to implement cost-saving measures to adjust wages. Do I really need to implement FWS? Well, the reason, since we're here, of course, the answer is yes. The consideration is that really, even if you have implemented a cost-saving measure, there's no guarantee that disputes won't arise because you don't have a pre-agreed set of indicators for which you rely on to make the cost-saving measures. And the FWS also guarantees restoration of bonuses with good performance. It motivates employees to help with the business recovery. These are the things maybe your other forms of cost-saving measures do not provide. So we really do want companies to think about FWS and how it can be positioned to be both beneficial to the employer as well as to the employees. The second point we have heard very often is that my employees really prefer no pay leave, which is why I don't have FWS. So can I avoid not doing this? we want to recognize that actually no pay leave could be suited to some business downturn, really don't have work, but it may not be well suited to others. So in the recovery phase, again, no pay leave suffers from the disadvantage that actually you need extra manpower, but maybe your employees have gone on to take a second job, they have their contractual obligations to fulfill, and therefore they are unable to come back quickly enough. Relying on cost-saving measures like no pay leave also creates a certain degree of uncertainty to employees. Because these measures tend to be ad hoc, we have heard of 1 day per week, maybe 2 days per month. You have different combinations of no pay leave, but there is no guarantee and no certainty in how and when the no pay leave will be lifted. And furthermore, I think I mentioned under FWS, management takes the lead leads by example in taking deeper and earlier wage cuts. It also provides a lot of assurance to your rank and file employees. And overall, I think FWS provides a level of transparency and objectivity in managing wage costs that some of the other cost-saving measures may not be able to do. So I think Zarina will talk about more. I have seen her slides. She'll give a bit more details. But we also have a lot of partners who can help with companies if you decide to implement FWS, if you have specific questions about what should be the right practices for your company, for companies in your sector. I think we have SNAF, NTUC, SHRI, and of course, tafep. We also have a one-to-one kind of mentor consultation service for the companies when they run into issues in implementing FWS. So I just have a very short next section on managing excess manpower responsibly. Some of you will have seen the news. I think that's the photo on the left, where employers with more than 10 staff have to notify MOM of any retrenchment from 1st November. Those who are familiar with the system will know that in the past it's 5 employees over 6 months. We have decided to tighten this, mainly because we want employees really report every retrenchment, and so that we can help the employees when they get retrenched. By and large, I think most companies wouldn't be affected because many of companies retrench more than 5 during a 6-month period. But we hope to catch the employees who are affected by retrenchment early so that we can put them in touch with the appropriate agency who can help them to find a next job. In terms of TAMEM, the message is that really, if you cannot sustain your workforce and you have to retrench, we want mainly 2 very important outcomes. First, as far as possible, maintain a strong Singaporean core. And second is to conduct retrenchments responsibly, sensitively, and provide the necessary support to your employees. So we have created a 10-point checklist in the TAMEM because some people might find the advisory very long. So a checklist is really a quick way of you verifying whether you have done all the necessary steps before you carry out a retrenchment. Just a bit more about maintaining a Singaporean core. I think some people have asked, is it always the case that must favor citizens absolutely above PRs, above our foreign workers? I think the answer here is a bit more nuanced. We do want employers to lean in favor of citizens, but also recognize that we should not prevent them. We should actually allow them to retain capable permanent residents as part of their workforce. So really the primary consideration in any retrenchment exercise should be the merit and skills of the individuals and how they're going to keep the company, keep the business going in the future. So for the employees who unfortunately have to be retrenched, the local employees, Singaporeans or PRs, we do our utmost to help them to get back to work. I think that's the main way in which we help them and their families on an ongoing basis. Just giving an absolute priority to citizens will not make sense if the overall business is going to fail. So I think we have to take a practical approach in which the employer really have to make a fair and objective assessment in terms of who to retain in order to ensure that the business survives. The 10-point checklist is here. I'll not go into that in detail because I think it's quite lengthy. Maybe I'll just point out a few areas. First is really, there's quite a bit of government support, especially in terms of training. So if you're able to tap on the absentee payroll system, you're able to tap on the training grant. So please go and send your employees for training. So when they are reskilled, you can actually deploy them to jobs with higher productivity or maybe new areas of growth for your firm. The second point is really number 4 is to use objective criteria, and you should, as far as possible, discuss this criteria with your union. Ensure they're fairly applied when it comes to selection of employees. So if that's so, I think you are not running into problem in terms of people accusing the company of discriminating against locals. So the idea here is really to have objective criteria that no one can argue with. I think even if the employees eventually come to MOM, we do look at how the firms went about in terms of selection of the employees. And by and large, I think we have found the employers to be fair and have justified reasons why they retrench a certain employee, even though that person might happen to be a local worker. We also want employers to actually give a longer notice period and communicate the business situation to the employees quite early on to avoid last-minute surprises. I think there were a couple of unpleasant incidents that happened in the past where the employees were told to let go. They were given a very short period to consider the retrenchment benefit offer. So we don't want that to happen. And we want employers to plan this out carefully and maybe send your line managers for the appropriate training in terms of communicating what you should do in case of retrenchment. And last but not least, most important, do work with our agencies, WSG, NTUs, NTUCs, E2I in terms of employment facilitation. Because other than providing retrenchment benefit to the workers, it's important to get them onto a next job and not let them feel that they are struggling to find a second career. So if you engage the employment facilitation agencies quite early, you'll be able to provide the support and ensure that the employees are not left in a lurch. Some of the key learning points from the cases managed, as I said, employers have been more than reasonable in most cases, and majority are due to poor communication. So I wish actually the employer or the HR, you could have trained your line managers a bit better in the communication. Then they will avoid the unnecessary mediation process that happens at MOM. So common issues that employees have asked us, whether they can take no pay leave, whether they can be asked to clear their leave during period of low business activity. So I think we have given our responses to that through all the FAQs. We have engaged employers on what they should do and how they should do it fairly. And of course, retrenchment benefit is always a point of contention. And I think Taman spells it out quite clearly. If you are able to pay, I think our expectation is that employers should pay. Of course, we also recognize that some employers are really in dire, severe financial straits. And for these employers, we have made it clear that if you're unable to pay, then find some other way of supporting the employees. And both the employees and employers who have engaged with have, by and large, been reasonable, amicable in the settlement. So we are also very grateful for being able to steer them through the process. Just a bit of closing remarks. We know that recovery may not return to some sectors as quickly as others, but most have actually seen a steady growth and rebound, I think, in this year. So we do hope to reach the GDP growth of 6 to 7% as forecasted by NTI. In terms of those who have employers who have yet to implement FWS, we do want you to treat the wage cuts, if you have not restored them, as MVC or AVC. And then if you have already restored the wage cuts, well, you never made a wage cuts, but you don't have MVC, go and engage your employees on the MVC process, how it's going to be set up, what are the triggers, and when do you plan to use it, and then how will it be restored. So have these discussions with your employees and with your union about how to implement FWS as soon as possible. The third point is really to preserve jobs and to avoid retrenchments. I think everyone knows the message. So if you can send your employee for training to reskill them, please do that and not go for retrenchment and fresh hires just because you think that might be easier. Because I think the government actually gives quite a bit of support for training and redeployment of the employees, so you should look into that. And lastly, if you have difficulties on implementing FWS in terms of implementing your cost saving measures or managing retrenchments, I think our tripartite partners are more than happy to help you. The HR tech partners and PSC grants are also available for companies who want to implement certain systems to track the FWS and to implement the FWS restoration and cuts. So I think that's all I have today. I'll hand over the time to the MC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shuo. I'm sure we are now more familiar with the cost-saving measures, and we also note what are the resources that are available and the importance of starting the preparations early and communicating with employees in a timely manner. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the next topic is on building a performance-oriented, flexible and agile wage system. And our speaker is Ms Zarina Piperdi, Managing Director of 8List HR Consultancy Services. Ms Zarina has 35 years of experience in the airline and aerospace industry with deep and broad experience in human capital, strategy formulation, talent management, workforce planning, industrial relations, and the whole spectrum of HR services. Zarina was also the CHRO at SIA Engineering for 15 years, where she oversaw major manpower initiatives for transformation and productivity campaigns. Zarina, please.
Thank you, Lavinia. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here to share with you my thoughts on how you may structure performance-based, flexible and agile wage system. Let me share the screen. So firstly, a wage system, what is it made of? So really it is about the policies, the programs and the practices you have within your organization on determining as well as how you administer the total compensation that you have for all of your employees. So of course, you know, salaries, there's also incentives, there's bonuses, benefits, different types of benefits for different groups of employees in the organization. Now, the kind of different parts of total compensation that you deliver to your employees, each employee would receive it in a different way. So the value that each employee receives could be different. Some may value a higher number of annual leave days. Some may value a gym membership more than others. So it depends on the individual and what it is of their liking as part of a total package for them to be working within the organization. For a company, however, the expense recognized by the organization is common, regardless of how different individuals value the different parts of the total comp. And that total expense is recognized in the P&L, and that's the expense that companies would worry about if the company should face a crisis such as COVID last year, and how do they manage such costs. So a flexible wage system, which is what Shuo has explained earlier, and the parts of it that make up the FWS, allows companies to be nimble in how it manages its wage costs. And it also allows companies to quickly bring up or down the wage costs in response to the business conditions. I won't go too much into this because Shuo has covered quite a fair bit. So what is a performance-oriented, flexible and agile wage system? So the performance orientation is really against the company's financial performance as well as operational performance, or a combination of both. It also pays differentially for team performance as well as for employees' individual performance. So the performance orientation is both on the employer as well as on the employee. Flexible, it allows the company to pay more when the company does well. It also allows the company to bring it down when the company is doing poorly. It allows companies to pay more for better performers, as well as provide incentives to drive certain targets in a certain year or certain parts of the year. And agile is about speed in re-leveling the wages in tandem with company performance. As we have found last year, we all needed to work with speed to be able to manage down costs, to be able to sustain the business. And this speed is to allow us to either add or to remove incentives, whatever is appropriate at that point in time. Now, what is important here is that there should be transparency. When you move the wages up or down, there has to be understanding amongst the employees on how it is done, why it is done, so that transparency would give employees that comfort that there is such a structure in place and this is how it's working. So what are the objectives of a good wage system? Firstly, it allows the company to attract and retain employees. When employees know that there is a well-crafted structure in place within the organization that pays them more when they do better, that pays them more when the company is doing better, and yet is transparent on when the company needs to cut down on some wages, that allows the company that comfort and the trust to stay on within the company, and as well as recommend that company to others to join. Now, a good wage system would also allow motivating of productivity and superior quality amongst the employees. So you can drive certain objectives, certain goals of the company with a well-structured wage system. Controlling labor costs, that's very important, as we have mentioned earlier. You need to be able to control the expenses of the company, and wage cost is one of it. So a flexible wage system allows you to manage wage costs up or down, dependent on how the company is performing. Now, what are the aspects or the features of a good wage system? Basic tenet, it has to be fair and equitable. So you need to pay equally to individuals who do similar jobs, perform at the same level. It needs to give a satisfactory fixed wage in each month. Now, you would have seen some advertisements that promises high pay, but a lot of that high pay has to do with incentives or commissions and very, very low basic wage. Now, I think that there has to be a satisfactory fixed wage in each month, and the upside can be provided through the variable commission structure or incentive structure, because an employee would have spent the full month working for the company and would have certain commitments to fulfill. So a satisfactory fixed level needs to be in place. It also needs to recognize and pay more for higher performance and skills or different competency levels. And there has to be flexibility in changes, as we have spoken about, based on the employers as well as the employees' performance. Employees need to understand. So whatever it is that is built into the wage system, it needs to be explained to employees, and employees need to be able to understand the whole structure. Otherwise, if they don't understand, it would not motivate them to be able to perform better so that they can enjoy the rewards of a better total compensation for the year. And to be able to give that understanding, there has to be sufficient communications on the wage system to employees, and if there are unions within the company, to the union, so that they can front some of the questions raised by employees to allow them to understand fully what it means. Transparently, we talked about that earlier. How do the variable components work within the total scheme of things? How they are adjusted and the triggers, what it means, when does it get cut, when does it get reinstated, and we'll cover more of that in a little while. So what are the components of a performance-oriented, flexible, and agile wage system? So we talked about the fixed monthly salary. So it's useful to have a satisfactory monthly salary level that is not tied to the company's profitability or the employee's performance. That allows the employee to have some assurance of a steady receipt of income each month. And then you put in the monthly variable component, the MVC. Shuo has covered much of that. So this is part of the monthly basic salary. It's almost assured, but in times of need, the company can use it to reduce the wages of individuals because the company needs to preserve its cash, because it is in a poor financial situation. To all intents and purposes, otherwise, it is treated like your fixed monthly. It is used to compute overtime payment. It is used to compute your CPF contribution. Now, companies should set clear guidelines on when the MC can be adjusted partially or fully, and when the reinstatement needs to take place, and we'll cover that. And then we have the annual variable component. This is directly linked to the company's performance. AVC payments would vary with the company's operating or financial performance, or a combination of many other factors as well, and we'll cover some of that later. It can include the 13-month bonus or a profit sharing bonus or some other variable payments tied to company performance. And importantly, you would pay differentially for different levels of employees and teams' performance levels. So MVC now. During 2020, many companies would have had to resort to wage cuts. Shuo would have covered some examples as well. So some cut 5%, some cut more. And then really now we would have been reading that some companies have returned those wage cuts and some are in the process of doing so. So as part of reinstatement, as Shuo mentioned, we want to build up the MVC component. Shuo has already touched this example of the 5% wage cut. What is important is that when it's reinstated, you build it into MVC. But what we need to be mindful of going forward as well is once you've set it up, then whatever future salary adjustments that are put in place also needs to break it down into fixed and MVC. The same thing for an example with a 10% wage cut. So it can be then structured into a 10% MVC now, but any future adjustments of salary increments, to bear in mind that you do need to break it down into that proportion of 90% fixed and 10% MVC so that you continue to maintain that proportion of 90-10. So the MVC allows companies to sustain itself. It allows you to preserve cash. And importantly, it allows you to retain employees because really, mathematically, what is wage cost, right? So it is average wage cost per employee times the number of employees. So if you are unable to manage the average wage cost per employee, what can you do? You have to reduce the number of employees. And that's not good. That's a painful downside that you want to avoid. But if you can manage the average wage per employee through the use of FWS within the MVC component, for example, then you would have a better chance of being able to keep all of your employees and you would be better placed to enjoy the upside when the business recovers. So here, a clear mechanism to activate MVC cuts and MVC reinstatement is useful. Provide that clarity to employees and transparency in what it is that the company is doing. So you need to decide what is the trigger for the MVC cut and reinstatement, and you need to determine that level. So for each company, every company is different. What is that level where a company would consider itself to be in financial distress? Shuo shared that example of a company in the hospitality industry, which has used monthly revenues. So different companies can use different things. Important question to ask is, how much losses can a company sustain? Do you have enough cash? And how much can that support in terms of losses from a cash flow example? So here is an example of a company using operating loss as its KPI, where the company may consider that any loss is very difficult for them because the cash position doesn't allow them to sustain themselves for a very long time. So anything that gets into an operating loss position, they would want to trigger an MVC cut. So a small loss per quarter would allow a 2.5% cut, and then exceeding 300,000 loss per quarter would lead to a 10% MVC cut. So all of the MVC. Now, how this works is that every quarter the company would have to share with the employees what does the trigger look like, and when in a quarter the company recovers, it reduces its loss or it goes into a profit situation, then in the following quarter the MVC would be reinstated. So the table gives clarity to employees. It shows the ups and downs. It shows when it will be cut. It shows when it will be reinstated. So companies ought to ask itself whether there is already an MVC component today. If you already have one, that's great. So perhaps the question to ask is it clear though to the employees of when it is cut and when it is reinstated? And at this point in time, if it's not been reinstated, have the employees been told why not and when it will be reinstated? So those are the questions to ask yourself to make it even stronger. And if you've not put in an MVC structure yet at this point in time, then as we've explained earlier and how Shuo has also explained earlier, it is to carve out a portion now. The reinstatement can go into MVC. So the default scenario is that MVC will be paid along with basic salary, but it shows you when it will be cut and when it will be reinstated. And importantly, explain very clearly to the employees about this structure and how it will be used in future. And if the MVC cut happened last year and now you put it in place, they would already understand, okay, that's what's happened. And in future, this is how it will be done. And at this level, we ought to be getting back the MVC cut. Okay, so that's the MVC. And now let's move on to AVC. The AVC component allows companies to reward based on the company's performance. It allows you to recognize different levels of employee performance. You can reward them differently for different levels of contribution in the year. And you will also be able to use it to re-level your wage costs up and down, depending on the company's financial means. So higher profits gives you a higher cash flow to be able to support higher bonuses. It also allows you, depending on how you structure your AVC, it allows you to motivate desired behaviors and the drive for better performance. So the KPIs that you choose to put into your AVC formula could allow you to motivate certain behaviors and could allow you to push for certain goals that you have for the company. Now, AVC can be in the form of a 13-month bonus, or it can be the company profit sharing bonus, it can be performance incentives, or some other variable payments. So first, you need to determine what type of AVC component is suitable and the frequency with which you would want to pay it, whether annually, half-yearly, or quarterly. You want to decide on the metrics to be used to determine the AVC component. So what is important for the company? Is it profits? Is it better safety? Is it growth, customer satisfaction? Or it could be a combination of many things. So if you want to move it up in a balanced way, it could be a percentage of each of these things. And then also note, to be clear on the company's affordability. How much of profits are to be shared with employees? Is 1/3 a good rule of thumb? Or is a company on a trajectory where it needs to expand the business and therefore needs to retain more of the cash for the expansion? If yes, is 20% a better number? Or a company could already be very cash rich, has done a lot of expansion already, and has that cash available. And that company may even say even 50% is affordable. So every company has its own ways to measure its affordability. So you need to decide what it is comfortable to be shared to the employees. So this is an example of how an AVC table can be structured. So firstly is to set the performance levels for each of the KPIs. So this example is where the company decides to go in a balanced way. And there are 4 metrics: profit, safety, production output, as well as customer satisfaction. And for each of these KPIs, to set different levels of performance, which point to different levels of profit sharing bonus. So you need to decide, for example, here, profit, level 1 profit is $0 to $2.5 million. Level 4 profit is anything more than $7.5 million. Now at these levels, at level 4 profit, then you would pay 1 month bonus. And this is just one slice, because you then would look at, okay, what about the safety metric? What about the output metric? So in a very good year where the company performs very well on all of the 4 measures, the bonus pool could be 3.25 months of bonus for all of its employees. So this table shows how the bonus is all added up, and it shows to the employees how the company is performing in all of these measures and what it means to them. Now, once the bonus pool is set, then the next thing is, how do you distribute the bonus pool amongst all of the employees? Now, the way that it is distributed ought to be able to motivate performance, because you want to be able to push your employees to be better performers, to rise up to different challenges, and to contribute in the best way possible. So you want to have differentiated payouts based on the performance levels. So even when the pool is, say, 2.25 months at level 3, for example, a good performer may get 3.5 months, whereas a poorer performer may get 1 month. So you'd spread it out differentially based on performance of individuals. And the way to do that is to have a multiplier applied to the bonus pool, and then that will show you what it is that needs to be paid to each employee. So these are quite technical, but it shows you the how-tos to structure an AVC for the company. And there are many ways to do this. So besides the example of a profit sharing bonus, the company may also have other deliverables that it wants to push, whether it be a sales target, whether it is a productivity improvement, or whether there is a transformation program that it wants to pivot towards. So AVC elements can be used to push any of these deliverables, and you can have different payouts at different points in time during the year to push these deliverables. So for example, you could have a monthly payout to the sales staff to push the sales targets, so the sales incentives. You could every quarter pay all staff a productivity payout if certain production levels are reached. And then annually, you could have all staff enjoy a performance bonus based on the KPIs that you set for the profit sharing bonus scheme. And depending on those KPIs, everybody would get a share of the profits. So you could have different payouts at different points in time. Now, some companies may already be paying its employees annual bonuses or incentives on a fully discretionary basis. And those companies may say, why do I need to set up a different structure? Why do I even have to have that time on my hands? I can continue to do so on a fully discretionary basis. Well, our view is that to have a defined structure for such bonuses and incentives, it allows the company to be transparent in its reward scheme. And with that transparency, the employees know what it is that's driving what they get paid, right? So it gives that understanding, and when it gives that understanding, it would motivate the employees to perform at a higher level for better rewards. And having that transparency and that clarity also allows the employees to build trust with the employer. And with transparency, clarity, and trust, the employees would work well with the company in good times as well as bad times, because they understand what the structure is and how it works, and they would put in best efforts to weather such good and bad times together. We've covered the MVC and AVC. I would also like to touch on one more point that can be considered in a good wage structure, which is an appropriate salary range. So there are different jobs in the company, and it would be useful to have within each job family what is the salary range, because it then allows you to plan ahead for how employees are going to grow in their jobs and going to be paid higher as they grow in their jobs and build up their competencies and knowledge. So for that, they need to know what is the minimum of that range, what is the maximum. And as a rule of thumb, a ratio of 1.5 max-min ratio is a useful way to structure it. You also look at what it is other companies are paying for those similar types of jobs, and therefore you would be able to be competitive in the wages, and you'd be able to retain your employees. So to do that, you would need to understand the nature of the job, what kind of knowledge, what kind of skills, experience you need. You need to ask yourself what kind of responsibilities individuals will need to have, and the kind of accountabilities that they have, as well as the hierarchy within the company. This is an example of, say, a fresh grad from a uni, when coming into a company, may get as start point $3,000, and then as he or she grows into the job, she can go all the way up to 4,500, which is a ratio of 1.5. And then after a few years, having gained enough knowledge in the job, she moves on to become a senior executive. She gets 4,002 and can grow on to 6,003. So this is just an example. Different jobs would command different salary ranges, but it allows the employees to know that this is what is available to them, and this is how they will grow their salaries over time. Now, this is an example of a company, say, with warehousing operations. So there is a salary ladder, so to speak. Someone who joins in at the bottom at grade 1 may start at $1,500 and then be able to grow into the job and earn up to 2,005. Having taken more courses and gotten more experience in the job, can move on to become an officer and grow his salary up to 3,005. And then after some more years and building up on experience, building up on knowledge, he can even become the warehouse executive. At the same time, you would allow individuals from outside to join in at different parts of the career ladder. So a fresh grad could come in and be a warehouse executive and then be into the 3,000 to 4,500 range. So this gives clarity in how different jobs are to be paid. It also gives the company a means to share with its employees that this is the career ladder, this is the career progression that's available for you. So knowing all of the components that make up that wage structure, how do you implement it? The most important is to be able to communicate this wage structure to employees, for them to fully understand what are the components and how are the different KPIs are set, and the trigger levels, etc. So you need to set that and you need to communicate that to all of the employees. And you also need to communicate to the employees their own individual goals. What are the deliverables that the employees have to be looked at and how they would be measured at the end of the year. Having set the company's goals and KPI levels and trigger levels, and having set the expectations from the employees, you would then provide regular feedback to the employees on their performance as well as on the company's performance, so that they know whether they are up to speed, whether the company is keeping track to its goals, and be able to more or less know at the end of the year, is there a bonus coming? Is there no bonus coming? Because they would be apprised of the company's performance during the course of the year. So as we recover from COVID, it is important for us to recognize the sacrifices that have been made by employees. There were pay cuts, and even if the MVCs had not been cut, the annual variable components would have been a far reduced amount. So now that there is the possibility that many companies would be able to earn higher profits, it is timely to share some of those higher profits with the employees if it is within the company's financial means. It is also timely to review the wage structure and make changes to be better prepared for the next crisis. So we talked about MVC and AVC, and we need to build that transparency and build that trust with employees so that at the next round, things are very clear and you'd be able to move with agility. So have ample comms and frequent feedback to all employees so that they fully understand what it's about and be able to look forward on what is available to them. So in summary, a good wage system is important to deliver the company's objectives and to attract and retain employees. The flexibility in total wages would allow companies to be better prepared for good as well as bad times, and it would allow you to motivate the employees to perform better. A very important point is that we talk about FWS in such times as COVID. People may begin to think that it is something that is used to cut pay. But really, it is as much about paying well in good times as it is about adjusting down in bad times. FWS allows the rewards to be shared well with employees when the company is doing well. So that has to be hyped up as well, that it is as much about paying well in good times. Now, the speed of adjustment of total wage costs can be the determinant of whether or not the company sustains itself. So that's an important factor, and therefore having that transparency and the clarity of what the wage structure is about allows you that speed of adjustment. So that's what I have. Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, please feel free to do so at the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Zarina, for your detailed sharing on the implementation of flexible wage system. And now we shall proceed to the panel discussion on the topic, the journey in implementing FWS and overcoming the obstacles. Let us welcome our first panelist, Ms. Chan Hui Fong, Deputy Secretary General of NTUC. Representing workers and labor movement, she sits in several tripartite committees that look into wages, workplace and employment practices, including employment of mature workers and labor-related legislations. She is also co-chair of TAFEP and director of Tripartite Alliance Limited. Our second panelist is Mr. Kwa Boon Hui, Group CEO of MTQ Corporation Limited, a listed company providing oil and gas engineering and subsea services. Mr. Kwa is also the Vice President of Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce and Industry and Council Member of Singapore National Employers Federation, SNEF. He's also a part of National Wages Council and has served both on the tripartite work groups on older workers and lower wage workers. Our next panelist is Mr. Sim Kim Guan, Executive Director, Singapore National Employers Federation, SNEF. Mr. Sim joined SNEF in June 2020 as the Executive Director. Before SNEF, he served in the Republic of Singapore Navy, where he held several various staff and operational appointments and retired from the Singapore Armed Forces as Chief of Staff. This was followed by a series of senior appointments in the civil service. And we would also like to welcome Mr. Shuo and Ms Zarina Piperdi back to join us in the panel discussion. Last but not least, let us welcome our esteemed moderator, Mr. Alvin Goh, Executive Director of Singapore Human Resources Institute, SHRI. Alvin is an accomplished international senior business manager with over 15 years of experience in the financial and consulting industry, where he played key roles in business and human capital transformation projects. He spent the last 7 years in a regional bank covering 15 cities as the head of human capital and head of CEO office, where he was responsible for driving the business transformation and human capital strategy and initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, we strongly encourage you to join us in this panel discussion by typing your questions in the Q&A box. Without further ado, let's welcome the panel speakers, and I will now hand over the time to our moderator, Mr. Alvin Goh. Alvin, please.
Thanks a lot, Vania. Thanks for the introduction itself, and welcome again to all my fellow panelists itself. So I think we heard a lot from both Shuo and Zarina itself about the need and the importance of the flexible wage system. And just to kick us off on this panel discussion, perhaps maybe I'll go back to Shuo as the first speaker itself, and Shuo, I would like to really ask you, the FWS, is it considered as a deviation from the employment contracts? And really, do employees themselves have to agree to the implementation before employers can actually put it in place? Your view especially is important to give us that clarity, especially from the Employment Act perspective. Shuo, what do you think?
Thanks, Alvin, for the question. I certainly think that any deviation or any changes to the contract in terms of the payment structure should be discussed and agreed upon with the employee. I think during the start of the pandemic, we have seen cases where the employer made unilateral adjustments to our contracts, and that resulted in quite a bit of unhappiness among the employees and also confusion. Some of them put employees on no pay leave. Instead of telling and engaging an employee on why they should go on no pay leave, the employer just wrote like a notice that you are on no pay leave from what date to what date. So for FWS to work, I think the parameters for it really need to be agreed on beforehand with the employee, so that you don't have this kind of disputes when you actually need to trigger the FWS. So I think the short answer is yes, you should discuss and agree in terms of how the FWS will be structured. Of course, some of the things are management prerogatives, like the KPIs, how it's computed, those are the management functions. But by and large, I think in terms of how it's implemented, it should be discussed and agreed upon with the employees. Thank you, Alvin.
Thanks for that. I think actually you made a very strong point about building trust between employer and employee. So on that note, talking about trust itself, I want to go to Mr. Kwa. Mr. Kwa being the group CEO itself, and from an employer perspective, we always know that building trust between employers and employees are very important. And how will you be able to share in terms of what has your company been doing to build up and maintain trust especially during this challenging times whereby we are seeing a lot of economic headwind as well?
Thank you, Alvin. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, it's a very good question. The last 18 months have really tested trust, tested our ability to engage with our workers in a very big way. We have people living in dormitories. We have Malaysians living across the border. So we have every gauntlet. When Shuo was talking about all the things, it just ticked all my boxes of what has happened the last 18 months. And I think, one of the things we've been very focused on is making sure we are publicly listed. So how we do is a matter of public record. But we're not a very big company, so it's not like only big companies can do that. And I think a lot of what I've said to a lot of my fellow employees is, look, times are very challenging for everybody. Even the workers know that. This is the perfect time to be open and upfront, tell them how we're doing, so that when you explore all the actions that we talked about, that willingness to all chip in, at least exist. So I think if one thing I have learned from this last 18 months is, the traditional boss who doesn't want to give the employer, doesn't want to give the employee the full picture, and tries to keep something up his sleeve. It's very hard to do that, not very helpful. And I think all employers need to kind of embrace that the employees are very, very much going to be a picture of how the company performs moving ahead.
Right. Thanks, Mr. Kwok. Thanks for that. Yeah, and I really like the fact that you talk about is this FWS system is not just applicable to only big companies that you can implement this itself. And I think also all sectors itself in the Singapore economy should also perhaps maybe take a strong look at the FWS. So on that note, I want to come back to Mr. Sim as from a SNAP perspective, right, representing all the employers in Singapore itself and a large group of them. And Mr. Sim, to you itself, what's the best way in terms of having that productive two-way conversation about implementing the flexible wage system with employees so that they can better understand what are the key factors that the company is undertaking itself?
So I think as Mr. Kwok mentioned earlier, it is very important to communicate with the employees. So for unionized company, certainly you do need to engage the unions, get the unions on board, engage them. And then when you engage the employees, do it together with the union leaders. And for non-unionized companies, it is possible to identify what we call informal leaders within the workforce. Engage them, get them on board, co-opt them in discussion, and then perhaps organize a town hall where you can then engage the employees. And similarly, ensure that these leaders are there with you when as employers you engage the employees. Now, in terms of the information that you need to share, I think from the very broad perspective, it is possible to talk about some of the guidelines that have been issued, such as the NWC guidelines, as well as tafep, which was mentioned by Shuo earlier. More specifically, in implementing FWS, I think some of the information that the employees will be looking out to hear from the employers will be some of the examples that Zarina mentioned, such as for MVC cards, what will be some of the triggers? And also, it's not just about when companies are not doing well, right? It's also when companies are doing better. Then, for example, in terms of the AVC, how the company will be also able to share some of its profits. And I think Bunu also mentioned, right, it's important for companies to continue to engage their employees, help them understand relevant information about the company's performance, as well as business prospects. So the more a company can share and with their employees, I think you are able to build trust. And the more you are able to build trust, then you can possibly have your employees come and help shoulder some of the burdens when the companies are not doing well, so that you can save jobs. But at the same time, motivate them to think about the profits that they can share when the company is doing well.
Right. Thanks for that note. You talk about getting the unions involved, especially if the companies are unionized and so forth. So on that note, I want to go back to Hui Fong itself. From a union perspective, while employers themselves, like Mr. Kwok, and also from Mr. Sim's perspective, as they try to help the businesses stay afloat and sustain the business itself, from a union perspective, how can the union actually encourage employees to do their part? Because, as what Shuo and Zarina talk about in their speeches about, it's all about communication, clarity, building the understanding, building the trust. So from the union perspective, what's your take on that, Hui Fong?
Yeah, so thanks, Alvin. I totally agree. In unions context, what we look out for is transparency and clarity. I think you take the pandemic, the COVID, for example, that was a critical period where we need a lot of information sharing from the companies, and we need to have very close communication on what's going to happen over the next 2 weeks, 2 months, because there was a lot of uncertainties. So when we talk about building a flexible wage system, I saw one of the questions as will workers become suspicious if you talk about building a wage system where I will take up 10% of a pay and calibrate as MDC? I think the reality is how the narrative will happen, how the conversation will take place is important. Coming from the unions, we go for, importantly, job security and income stability. And our premise is, if there's anything that can help the companies to sustain the growth and do better, we should support. Because end of the day, we need the company to be there to grow in order to support the workers. So I think that's a premise that we have. Hence, I think in the conversations, we don't have to go into MVC cut, but we will need to take a more holistic view. Because a flexible wage system, which I think Zarina has mentioned, is not just about MVC. We really have to go back to why we spoke about the flexible wage system right in the 1980s, okay, and why MVC was introduced in 1999. I think if some of us could remember, 1998, we have a financial crisis, and that led to a 10% CPF cut. So we introduced an MVC because if it's broad-based, most companies have an MVC component. We want to avoid this blunt tool of CPF cut. So we have been using that narrative to explain to the workers that first, I think everybody wants to avoid the MVC, CPF cut. And therefore, how do we ensure that there's some component that has this nimbleness in the wage structure that can allow for flexibility? And this is how we start the conversation. And therefore, I think it's useful to really talk to the workers that the whole purpose is not to cut anybody's pay. I think it's in nobody's joy to cut anybody's pay. But how do we ensure that we have a drawer plan? When the things happen, the last we want is everybody panic and there's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of angst and nobody want to move into the negotiation. Then you create a lot of mistrust. And that is something that we'll avoid. So I think when we say never is a good time, but we certainly will urge all companies, start this conversation early, talk to the workers, what is the intent? Why do we need to have a flexible wage system? In good times, never mind, put it aside. But in bad times, at least we can sit down. And because the restoration is symmetrical, so when you cut, you also know when you can get it back. I think that's important to attribute trust.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think it's a very interesting point you made about when to start and when to reinstate and so forth. So on that note, I want to shift back to Zarina itself. It's never a good time, all right, and it's never a bad time. So on that note itself, some companies itself, they basically do not know where to start in terms of implementing the flexible wage system, or for that matter, the MVC. So what would your advice in terms of how does a company kickstart this whole implementation plan in their organization? Coming from an external consultant perspective, what's your take?
Thanks, Alvin. I guess the first step would be to have communications with all of the employees to be able to explain to them what is the current salary structure, how has it worked for the company up to this point in time, what are the good points about it, and what are the not so good points, right? So if a company has had different levels of profitability over the past 5 years, let's say, right, they would be able to show that without a flexible wage system, the salaries, the total comp would have been pretty much quite standard every year, right? So they should be able to show to the employees that, had we put in a profit sharing bonus structure in place, then this is how it could have panned out. So you want to be able to show to the employees what it would mean to them if a good wage structure, which is inclusive of an AVC, example, is in place, right? Show them what's the impact to their own take-home pay, the total comp for the year, and the upsides. So I think it is useful to sell the upsides, but at the same time, to build that trust, share with them the downsides as well. Because in a year where the company is not doing well, then this is what could happen to your total pay. And explain then also the fact that some companies may be faring so poorly in a situation such as COVID that really it is a decision between cutting everybody's wages by 5 to 10 to 15% or shutting down the company itself. I always tell where I was before that without a company, there's no employees, right? So you must first protect the company and then you can enjoy the benefits of whatever it is that the company generates. So there must be that full understanding of what the wage structure is about and how the company as a whole would want the company to perform well so that it can reward the employees well. So that understanding must be there. And once the understanding is there, then you can start structuring it and then share the journey with the employees to say, okay, this is what we're going to do in this quarter. This is how we're going to build it up. And then next year, when we do the next service increment, then we are going to build it up again to build up the portion of the MVC and etc. etc. So you have to share that journey of building it up, structuring it well.
Right. Thanks for that. So thanks for sharing this. I saw in the earlier slide you talk about monthly, quarterly, and even half-yearly adjustments and so forth. But again, when we come and talk about all this itself, a lot of SMEs on that note struggle with their manpower plans and so forth. So I want to come back to Mr. Sim itself from an employer's SNAP perspective, right? How do you see FWS contributing to a company's manpower strategy? Because as what Zarina said, it's so flexible, right, with the FWS. And how do you continuously attract, retain, and even plan for manpower? And what are some other companies doing outside that?
Okay, I think as Zarina mentioned in her presentation, first and foremost, FWS allows company to make quick adjustments when they encounter challenging times. And it's certainly important if the companies can continue to sustain itself and retain its employees. If you don't have that flexibility, you actually end up having to let go of employees. And obviously, if you let go of employees, then that will affect your capability when you see an upturn. So the ability to retain your employees is important. Secondly, the flexibility also allows you to reward your employees according to both the company performance as well as the individual performance, right? So when you have good people who are really contributing very well, you can reward them better. And through that process, actually you are better able to retain talent. And I think a more transparent and structured system, earlier we talked about trust. Trust is important, right? Companies, if you don't have the trust of your employees, then it is more likely than not that employees will not stay with you for the long term. But if you are able to show that you value, respect, you develop your employees and you build trust with your employee, it is more likely than not that they will stay with you through thick and thin. And in that process, help you build your business. And as your business prosper, I think your workers will do better as well.
Thanks for that, Mr. Sim. So I want to shift gear a little bit. I want to go to the Q&A box itself that some of the participants have actually included some of the questions. And I see this very interesting question from Mr. Gary Harris, and it's actually attention to Shuo. And the question is this: how do industries like the security sector under the PWM or progressive wage model be able to implement the Union-I FWS, right? Because I think where he's coming from is that some companies are already unionized, and is it going to be a challenge if the FWS is inside their collective agreement as well? So Shuo, what do you think of that?
Yeah, thanks, Alvin, for the questions from the participants. So I think for the first question, just because there's PWM, I don't think it's in conflict with the whole concept of FWS, because when we look at FWS, it's referring to the split between the fixed and what's variable. Actually, both the fixed and the variable are part of the basic salary. So when you look at things like OT rates, they are the total package. Fixed salary plus a variable. Of course, in times of adjustments, then the company need to adjust the total, the basic salary, and that might affect OT. But by and large, I think when we look at the PWM salary bars, implementing FWS itself shouldn't be in conflict with that. Then for unionized companies, again, it's a matter of whether when you are trying to introduce this, has this been discussed with the union in the past? If it is, I think it's already part of the CA. But if you're trying to introduce something new, you should take the time to discuss with the union the specifics. Then it's possible to amend the CA. So you'll file an application to amend the CA, and my colleagues in the Industrial Relations Department will be more than happy to process it. But getting that agreement with the union is probably the more important, and that's the core of the work. Actually, amending the CA is just a procedural issue. Yeah.
Right. Thanks, Shuo. I'm so happy that Hui Fo is on the panel as well. So Hui Fo, what do you think from a CA perspective, from a union perspective, and to really amend collective agreements and so forth? to accommodate the flexible FWS system as well?
I don't see that as a challenge. It is if it's one that both parties have co-created and agree that this is the right thing to do, unless there's real urgency that you have to vary the CA. Otherwise, the CA duration is only 2 to 3 years, so shouldn't be a problem. I mean, it's a good to do it if you just signed a CA and you did not foresee it. I don't see it as a big concern. I'm just trying to understand the way what the question, and also I think there were also some other follow-up questions. I think first, if we all agree that MVC will be a useful component in our wage structure, then let's look at how we want to calibrate this. There were also questions as in would it therefore affect the AWS? I think bearing in mind that MVC is part of your basic salary. So if today my pay is $3,000, 10% MVC is $300. You could actually construct it as 2007 as basic and 300 MVC. But anything is based on the $3,000. My notice pay is $3,000. If I have an overtime, it's actually based on $3,000. So that's not an issue. And I think one of the challenge that we face, which I think Kim Guan and Shuo is aware, during pandemic time or even during the few times when there were wage cuts, we do have companies that implemented MVC. And when there's MVC component in all workers, including foreign workers. And the question is, how do you deal with those S-Pass holders when there's a minimum salary? Can I cut below the minimum? So that was a question that was raised. I think we came up with the solutions that it cannot be a case where the locals have a cut and the foreigners don't have a cut. So you have to apply across the board. This is where you will need to explain to the ministry that I will need to do this because I need to do this to save jobs. So these are all possibles. These are all possibilities.
Right. Thanks for that. So coming back to a question from Daphne Chiang, she asked basically, we have a Malaysian subsidiary company as well. So I suppose she's got Singapore and Malaysia operations, and apparently they would like to implement the FWS itself. Perhaps Mr. Kwa itself, would you like to take this question? Is it feasible? I mean, coming from Mr. Sim can also chime in on this question itself. I mean, Singapore itself, a lot of our SMEs and some of our companies have got operations around the world. And I think FWS is actually a very fantastic system itself. So what will be the concerns and to go about implementing FWS across borders? Mr. Kwa, you're on mute.
Hi. Well, we don't have a workforce in Malaysia, but I think the message, if you have ability to communicate with a Malaysian-based workforce, is the same. It's whether you can get the people on board to recognize that this is something sensible for your operations there. And frankly, I think the last 18 months to me have been the best time to address this issue because everyone has been very cognizant of the difficulties we are all operating under. So I think it's really a question of whether we can get the employer and the employees to be on the same page. No reason why you can't do that in Malaysia, but I mean the challenge is, of course, you have to do this locally quite often, and you can't really do it across national operations So I think this is actually the perfect time to look at flexible wage systems because we've all gone through this period where there have been cuts, it's the perfect time to reset and appraise for the future, and I think both parties will be receptive listening to what ideas you have.
Right. Mr. Sim, what do you think?
So I think the idea is if there are cuts that have already been made, so the suggestion is when you reinstate those cuts, then reinstate that as a variable component. So the conversation will have to be done with all employees, so potentially both Singapore and the Malaysia side. But I think we also need to recognize that there will be different operating contexts in different countries. So employers also need to take into account what is the operating context and to see how possible it is. It may be that a company may have quite different compensation philosophy across different geographies. Also to account for the fact that different geographies have got different standard of living, different cost of living, and so on. So So I think companies, depending on which sector you're in, how your employees work, etc., will have to take that into account. But one thing is key, engage your employees and communicate.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks for that. Fully agree that different companies, same company, different geographies would have different contexts. And I mean, we still need to adhere to the local employment laws and so forth. So based on that, I want to also take a question from Janice. Janice talks about by restoring pay cuts, does it refer to a reinstatement, or must we do a payback of all previous MVC cuts? Right? And she said the difference for basic pay and OT payments when times get better, is it of the latter that is not a practical tool to avoid retrenchment? What's your advice on that? Maybe on that note, I want to go back to Shuo. And Shuo, what's your take? Is there a need to pay back?
I think my fellow participants panelists will be happy to answer the question, but maybe I just give my quick response. I mean, by and large, when we look at the NWC recommendations, there's no specific condition about when you when there's no need for the wage cuts anymore, do you actually pay back what you have cut in the past? So while there's no recommendation, I think employer can certainly be sympathetic to apply with the workers, especially when they had a pay cut in the midst of the pandemic. So if possible, of course, then depending on the company's financial situation, they can consider giving back in terms of variable component, maybe not the monthly variable, but in terms of some special one-time payment in order to recognize the contribution and the sacrifices of the workers. Yeah.
Great. Mr. Sim, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I agree. In essence, when the company is now doing better, so recovering, reinstate the cuts. So the idea is reinstate any cuts that is below the variable component. And if it is possible, reinstate the cut that is the variable component. And if the company continues to do well, and sometimes you won't know, right? I mean, it's quite bumpy, right? You may be doing quite badly and then doing well a little bit. Actually, you're only seeing the light at the tunnel. You don't know whether it is really a train coming or not, right? So you may not want to be too fast, right? But at the end of the day, you will know what is your financial performance at the end of the year. If your financial performance is much better than anticipated, I think, as Shuo mentioned, recognize that the employees have been quite supportive of the efforts of the, help the company turn around, etc. And use the ABC, which is another variable component within the FWS, to reward employees accordingly. So that's one way in which I think companies can make use of this flexibility to continue to recognize efforts of employees and yet not, create a difficult situation for themselves.
Zarina, what about your take from a consultant perspective, right? What are we seeing today in terms of your experience, in terms of companies reinstating their ABC or providing a better performance bonus itself?
Well, I think that what has been cut, when the company is able to afford reinstating it, then it is reinstatement rather than paying back what has been cut. But as what Sim has mentioned, as well as Shuo has mentioned, if the company has done well enough, then it can share that better performance through a different form of payment rather than paying back the MVC that's been cut, but paying back in terms of AVC. Now, AVC can be as part of a higher profit that's generated, or even can be an incentive. So I've known of an example where there is an MVC cut in place, but because of certain initiatives that's been planned and the company has been able to deliver on, then there is an incentive payment that's given as a one-off to all of its employees. So that shows that, really it's not all about cutting, but being able to show when able and when affordable, what can be shared by the company. But again, always bearing in mind that you don't want to go rush in and then make it again unsustainable. So an annual or an incentive payment works better than the latter of paying everything back.
Right. Thanks for that. That's what's really. Joanne Kim asked a very interesting question. she said in the bad economic situation, the wage adjustment is understandable. She gets it, which is perfect. But what about the recovery of economic situation? Can we institutionalize the restoration of wages instead of leaving to companies? So I gather the question where she's coming from is that she's looking to MOM and say, can we institutionalize or set a policy itself? How sure? What do you think?
I think that's a very difficult policy to implement. I think we have to recognize that even in terms of recovery, every company will do slightly differently. Some recover faster than others. Some might still face challenges because of all the travel restrictions across the borders. So it will not be fair to any company if we institutionalize a single point that everyone must restore the MVC. I don't think that's practical. I don't think that's fair to the employers and to the employees.
Yeah.
So really, I think when NWC discussed wage guidelines, is a general guideline. I think even when the pandemic struck last year, I recognized that companies are in different situations, different kind of recommendations for different situations. So as far as possible, of course, I think we leave it to the employers, and we have found that employers have generally been very responsible. And when they're doing well, I think in response to market situation, the wage cuts will be naturally restored. Where there are really issues, I think the employees do approach us and we try to intervene and talk to both parties. I think we have been quite successful in getting all those disputes resolved. So in short answer, I don't think anything that's institutionalized is workable. We have to rely on the good senses of the employers and employees and some intervention from government whenever it's needed. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Sim, what do you think? Sorry, please.
Sorry. Can I just add on? I'm also trying to understand the question. If this is an MVC cut, so in the absence of an MVC, so company would have probably cut workers' wages by 5-10%. I think I can understand where the speaker Joanne is coming from. Without some clear matrix on when to cut and when to restore, it is going to be quite tough. I mean, I want to agree that most employers will be responsible, but honestly, without any clarity, how do I go about telling my employers that it's probably time to restore my wage cut if there's a wage cut? And in some instances, and in most instances, actually what we realize is 2020, most company freeze wages. Okay, those who are doing okay or not so okay, freeze wages. Doing very badly, they cut the wages. In the absence of a clear matrix, do I get my annual increment that were deferred or that was frozen last year back this year? I think these are actually some of the elements when we talk about having a flexible wage system, right? The flexibility of 70-10-20 is a structure. What we want is, how do you have a competitive structure, wage structure, with clarity in the components? Whether it's a salary, what would be the ratio like? What would be the annual variable component like? What is MVC? And when do I trigger this MVC? The clarity is important. I think the whole purpose of having MVC is that we want clarity on both ends. When it can be cut to save jobs, and when it can be restored. And the details as in if the person is only earning less than 1,500, can we don't cut the MVC? I think all those are being discussed, and we need to have clarity on that. And I think that's a merit of having the MVC. Thanks.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe just add 3 other points. One is that the NWC guidelines that we issue out every year actually serves as the broad guideline. It gives a sense of what is economic development, etc. Right? But at the same time, we recognize that even as the economy may be doing well, some sectors may be doing not so well. And for sectors that are doing well, there may be companies that are not doing so well. So it really doesn't make sense to have an approach that cuts across. But I think we want to have an approach that is more tailored, because as Wifeng mentioned earlier, one of the things that we are all tripartite partners are concerned about is ensuring that we save jobs in situations that we encountered like last year. Then I think, as How Shuo said, market forces will come into play, right? If companies that are doing well continue not to reward their employees fairly, especially in sectors that are doing well, actually I won't be surprised if employees choose to move to a company that is doing well and paying better, right? So I think in terms of having to ensure that you continue to retain your talent, companies do have to make sure that they are doing right by their workers as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. Mr. Kwa, do you have something to add from an employer's perspective, the importance of having the indicators of when to cut and when to restore?
Yeah, I think I've said the common theme today is that communicating certain benchmark guidelines when things are restored or reinstated is very important.
Yeah.
I think Joan's question also probably I read from a question that she feels that maybe some employers will take advantage of this and not want to reinstate when situations improve. I don't deny that there may be such employers, and I think there are many ways to call out, and I think bad employers are not going to be able to survive even in good times moving ahead. But one thing as an employer I will share is don't always assume the employer will recover. And this is a reality that this crisis has illustrated that not all companies are going to have the opportunity to recover. So when companies regrettably get to that point, it's you can blame the communication, you can blame the lack of trust, but you can't blame the company when it happens. Companies do not want to be unable to recover, and I think that sometimes employees need to appreciate that companies do not exist to keep paying them. Companies have to exist to do well and continue. And that is a big challenge now. It's a very big challenge.
Yeah. So in terms of,
if I may add on,
yes, please.
I think if the metrics were not made very clear at the beginning of when reinstatement happens, responsible employers will look at which point in time when it finds that it has reached that level of recovery where it can reinstate the MVC that's been cut, right? But there will be some irresponsible, less responsible employers. And I think where employees come into place, at some point in time, there's fatigue and they walk. They leave the company and they go find something else, right? But then there's also one more point which Mr. Kwa mentioned, which is that some companies don't quite recover fully. And then you may actually have to reach some difficult decisions because you may have, let's just take a very simple example, 100 employees earning at 90% of what they used to earn before. But the company cannot go back to a situation where it's 100 employees times 100 what they were earning before. So instead of lengthening and extending out over the next one more year of everybody getting 90%, that company may have to come to a difficult decision of, do we re-level ourselves? It is very difficult, so that the number of people who stay behind will get back the 100% of their salaries, but they may have to not replace the next person who leaves the job. Because otherwise they just can't support themselves because they don't see themselves going back to the level that they were at pre-COVID. So those are difficult decisions, but it needs to be made.
Yeah. So thanks for that. Thanks for that. The key points, Zarina, in terms of differentiation. Now, I got a question from Janice Tan. And Janice says that FWS makes perfect sense, however, are we allowed to differentiate mean max pay for local versus non-local workforce? My take is, of course, why differentiate, right? Why discriminate? But maybe, Zarina, coming back to you who will talk about the mean max. What's your view? Should we differentiate local versus non-local workforce? Is there even a need to have two different pay structures?
I think it has to be a function of what are the jobs that are being done. So if it's an identical job that's being done by a local as well as a non-local, then the same salary structure should prevail, right? But if it's a job where largely we've had to rely on a foreign workforce, then I think the reasons are clear why that's a job that a foreign workforce is being used for, right? Because our locals are just not going to work at those salary levels. So I think one has to look at what it is the jobs are within that company and who are the individuals performing that job and what is the makeup of that workforce for that particular job family. Common job, the basic principle is, yes, common job, common salary range. But there will always be exceptions, and certain jobs would be largely for a foreign workforce, and the salary ranges for that may not be identical to what is offered to a local.
Right.
Can I add a slightly different perspective? Because I think we may need to layer on the responsibility that the employer shoulders for the different class of workers. And quite often you find that for the foreign workforce, the responsibility that is placed on the employer is higher than for a local workforce. And so the compensation structure can be different, because once you take into account that there is heavier responsibility, such as, for example, medical. Today, for all the foreign workers, 100% of the medical requirement is placed on the employer, right? Whereas that is not the case for locals. So taking into account such differences, actually the compensation for the same job can actually be indeed different. But if everything else being equal, then I can understand where Zarina is coming from.
Thanks, Mr. Sim. So on that note, as we move into the last few minutes of the webinar itself, we've heard from every one of you the importance of the FWS being a transparent system to build trust, to communicate with our employers, rather between employers and employees. The importance of setting clear KPIs of when to reduce and also when to restore, reinstate the necessary itself. So on that note, I would like to invite each one of you to perhaps maybe share with the participants, right, as we end off the session today, what is the one key golden nugget that you want the participants to walk away with in terms of being able to adopt the FWS in their own organization? Perhaps maybe I can start from Zarina. Zarina, you're muted. Zarina, you're on mute.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. Essentially, for FWS to be thought of as a tool that allows the company to pay more as well as pay less, right? But the way to sell it is to say that really it is about motivating performance, to align employees to the goals of the company, and to allow the companies to share better rewards when it is able to do so. So we need to upsell those aspects, especially within the AVC elements of the pay structure, to say that this is how we can all align: employees' performance, companies' performance, total compensation, all aligned. And then at the same time, to build that trust, to also share with them the downsides and how the company may be able to use in very difficult times, how it is going to use to bring it down, so that everybody continues to have a job when the company is in that kind of situation.
Thanks for that, Zarina. Hui Feng, what's your take?
I go back to, again, the purpose of having a flexible wage system, that we look beyond just the structure, but to have a competitive salary range, competitive salary structure that has a variable component in to allow flexibility. And in the process of doing it, we will certainly encourage the employers and workers or unions to co-create the solution together, so that we take ownership and there's clarity on what it is in for both of us. It has to be a both win. It must be a win for the employers and win for the workers. Thanks.
Right. Mr. Sim?
Okay, at the recent SNEF 40th anniversary conference, we talked about agile employers. I believe the FWS is a tool that will help employers stay agile. So even as our economic cycles are getting shorter, employers with the support of their employees will be able to better ride the waves ahead.
Great, thanks, Mr. Sim. Coming back to Mr. Kwok.
I think my message to employers who are on the call is we all know the times still remain uncertain and there are a lot of challenges moving ahead. But you're not going to do better without your employees on board and working together with them. So, every opportunity to look to engage with them and make sure that you look at tools like FWS to give a better alignment is something that's very important, and we need to embrace that at this juncture in the wider economy. Yeah.
Thanks. Last but not least, Shuo.
Thanks, Alvin. Well, maybe I just live with a Chinese saying, right? 未雨绸缪, right? Which literally means to prepare yourself before it rains. So I think earlier we have seen questions about FWS, the difficulty, challenges when implementing it. So now maybe the economic climate is improving, and you find all these things that are very difficult to implement. But actually, it's important to think about what the future is uncertain. I think even though we are on a road to recovery, it's important for employers and employees to make the necessary preparations now, so that when and if we have a crisis again, or if the pandemic drags on and there are other challenges that come on board, you're well prepared for it. Yeah, so 未雨绸缪. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for the 成语 itself. So on that note, it's been a pleasure to have Zarina, Huifeng, Shuo, Mr. Sim, Mr. Kwa on this discussion. And without further ado, let me hand back to Lavanya, our MC for today, to bring us to the close. So once again, panelists, so thank you so much for your time and your contribution. Over to you, Lavanya.
Thanks, Alvin.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alvin and the panelists, Ms. Cham, Mr. Kwa, Mr. Sim, Mr. Shuo, and Ms. Piperdi. We really learned a lot from your sharing, and I believe our audience are also appreciative of the insights on the FWS journey. And thanks to the participants for your active participation and all your questions raised pre-webinar as well as the Q&A chat box. For the questions that we were not able to address today, not to worry, we will be following up with you after the webinar. I think we can all agree that the topic on flexible wage system is not something new, but as recommended by the NWC supplementary guidelines, there is urgency to implement it to respond to the challenges posed to our economy by the pandemic situation. And to equip ourselves better, I would like to direct you to some available online resources as you embark your journey on the flexible wage system in your company. We are happy to send these resources to you via email, so do indicate your email address in the webinar feedback form so that we can send the materials over to you. We value your feedback, so do let us know how you have enjoyed today's session. While everyone is scanning the code, we would like to express our sincere thanks once again to our moderator and panelists, and thank you for your generous sharing with our audience today. We'll just give a couple of minutes before we come to a close. And we have now come to the end of the program. Thank you everyone for your participation. We hope that today's webinar would be a good start to your journey on flexible wage system. Take care everyone, stay safe, and I wish you a pleasant evening ahead. Thank you.